Well, good morning again, church. It is good to be with you. It is an honor to be preaching here. It is my first time preaching at First Plymouth. And though I come to you this morning officially as the transitional conference minister of the Rocky Mountain Conference, I can't not also acknowledge that I come knowing that some of my closest and still some of my best friends were confirmed here, and that some of my closest colleagues were ordained here. I went to Mad Camp at La Forêt with some of your children, either as campers or counselors or both. And when I was pastoring in Salt Lake City at Holiday United Church of Christ, I believe it was this church when a young beloved man in our congregation, Thane Stark, died, and there were people in Colorado that wanted to have a space to gather. It was here that held that space for them. So I come to this congregation this morning, both as your conference minister and as one who was raised in this conference, simply wanting to say first, thank you for your faithful commitment, both with financial and human resources to the wider church, and for being a place that has raised people like me into the ministry and into someone who believes that what we are doing here really matters. So thank you. And join me in prayer. Generous one, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be faithful to you this morning, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. So 20 years in the ministry, and I have never preached on this text. Probably can kind of maybe guess why. I'm not exactly sure what was going on in there. And I'm a generally a lectionary preacher, so I've had plenty of opportunity to preach on this text. It was certainly an option to do so, but it was just this time around that it actually caught my attention. And then when I read Eric's Substack, I didn't know he had one of these, and thankfully he shared with me his Substack. I knew when I read this article that he wrote, Surviving the Apocalypse, I knew this was going to be the text for this week. If you haven't read his Substack, I encourage you to do so. There are many reasons I am grateful for his commentary, not the least of which is that he names what so many of us are feeling. Things are bad. Like apocalyptic bad, sometimes is how it feels. The systems and institutions that we have relied on and that have been guiding us as a nation for over 2 centuries seem to be collapsing or capitulating right before our eyes. Right, and as we gather here in this space, it's not just the societal, climatic, or geopolitical systems that seem to be collapsing. The mainline Protestant world isn't doing all that great either. 10 years ago, I participated in a leadership program with Margaret Wheatley called Warriors for the Human Spirit. I remember so vividly, we were gathered at our second retreat, and she said there would be a time in the not too distant future when we would look back on these days, in 2015 and 16, we would look back on these days as the good old days compared to what we would be facing in the years to come. I couldn't believe her, because at the time, 2015, all my sermons were about how hard things were and what we were struggling with. She said we would think of these as the good old days and to compare to what was coming, and how right she was. She had been studying the cycles of civilization for some time, and it had become pretty clear to her, and now to many others, that we were entering a stage known as collapse. And the first time I allowed this reality into my awareness, I felt like my heart was being torn apart. The grief of what is being lost is overwhelming. And as Eric points out in his Substack, in the midst of collapse, we all respond differently. Some want to deny that that's where we are. Some become kind of nihilistic, and some become hedonistic, like, well, it's all going to, let's just go have fun and not think about it anymore. And some opt to join the powers that are bringing it down. Well, in this bright and cheerful place that I have led us, enter Jeremiah. He'd been trying to warn his own people that their current choices were leading them towards destruction. King Zedekiah was so annoyed with Jeremiah that he had locked him up and put him away, threw him in prison. Too much gloom and doom, Jeremiah, you gotta stop. Well, then the doom and gloom becomes the reality. The Israelites find themselves surrounded by the Babylonians, and everything that they have known is about to be conquered. The Babylonians are about to conquer Israel and take all their land from them. And of course, right, we know for Israel, land is everything. This is what God has promised the Israelites. This is what God promised Abraham way back at the beginning. I will make of you a great nation, and I will lead you to a promised land. Well, here they are in their promised land. Centuries later, it is about to all be taken. And it's here that Jeremiah's message changes from doom and gloom and is replaced by absurd, foolish, audacious hope. Now God is telling him, buy a plot of land. It's all about to be taken, but buy a plot of land. And he does. He buys this land, he signs the deed, and he makes sure that the entire community of his sees it. He makes sure that there are witnesses. He has bought this land. He has purchased this field. And he purchases this field right at the moment when the land was not going to be worth anything. An investor would tell him that is a ridiculous choice. But here, of course, Jeremiah is not buying land to make a profit or to build a nest egg. He's choosing to invest in this land because in the very moment that the Israelites are at their lowest, when they are about to lose everything that they believed was the basis of their identity and relationship with their God, he takes an action that says, there is a future waiting for you. Indeed, this is an end, but this is not the end. You are not done. We are not done. God is not done. There is a future waiting for you. Purchasing this field was for Jeremiah an act of hope, believing that that future was in front of them. This is the statement that Jeremiah makes with this action. It is the statement that he breathes. There is a future to invest in. I imagine the Israelites did not want to accept what was happening in their world either. Right? Acknowledging this collapse that is surrounding us, that we are entering into, that is now where we are, is almost impossible to bear. And yet when we are willing to see it for what it is, this is actually what is happening, we can also remember that we are not the first to go through this. At our annual meeting this summer, we had Reverend Cameron Trimble from Convergence for our keynote speaker, and her whole presentation was on navigating the age of collapse. She too has been studying this pattern, and she says, like in just about every civilization, about 250 years, there is an eruption, a crisis, or multiple crises. And civilizations rise and they fall and they rise again. It's a cycle that's been happening and again and again and again. And I suppose the good news of that is that it confirms what Jeremiah sought to remind his people, that there is life on the other side of this present horror that we are living in. That's maybe the comforting news. The hard part is the reality that we are actually alive in one of those moments and living in one of these moments when we are in a civilizational fall, in this collapse. And I can't this morning speak to all these institutional systems that are in free fall at this moment, but because we are the church, and I am literally the face of an institution called the church, I work for the institution, I believe in the institution of church, I want to turn our attention to us in our own crisis. And I want to start with and share two things. So in studying with Margaret Wheatley, one of the things that she would talk to us about is that in this moment, right, changing our focus, thinking about what we're paying attention on, for so many of us activists and change makers, we've been trying to go big and change big structures and big policies. And like Jeremiah moves from this sort of doom and gloom to a change of direction, she says those of us who've been trying to make big change, have to refocus and think small. Think micro community. She talks about islands of sanity. She says these are small intentional spaces where people come together to reclaim values of trust, compassion, and cooperation. Islands of sanity are formed by groups of people, committed individuals who share a dedication of meaningful relationships and a sense of purpose, fostering stability, community, and sanity amid widespread uncertainty and breakdown. She says these are active communities that choose to operate outside the dominant patterns of competition, division, and fear that now characterize our larger systems. On these islands, people work together to uphold principles of kindness, inclusion, and shared responsibility, creating a sense of sanctuary that nurtures well-being and hope. Does that sound familiar? Second is this. Second thing I want to share. Mount St. Helens, I was a young child when this happened. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, and the mountainside, I remember seeing images. The mountainside and the miles surrounding it was so devastating that scientists believed it would take several generations for life to ever come back to this land, right? During the eruption, a 300-mile-an-hour lateral blast of hot air and debris flattened this old-growth forest. A cloud of ash climbed to 80,000 feet in the air, and in 15 minutes, it went up that high in 15 minutes, and in 15 days circled the globe. All told, the eruption blasted more than 230 square miles of forest, lakes, meadows, and streams. Now, Virginia Dale was one of the first scientists who landed in that landscape after the explosion. And she studies ecological, how environments recover, right? And she got on this land, and when it comes to studying devastation, she says Mount St. Helens was off the scale. This was so dead and so lifeless, she couldn't imagine life returning. Well, on that mountain, just 35 years later, these same scientists were now running their hands over green moss surrounded by purple lupin. Tracks of mice and fox could be seen near a running stream, and beside a 10-foot silver fir, out of a coyote's scat grew mushrooms. The ecosystem was recovering. What the scientists know now, but didn't understand then, is that when mountains blasted ash and rock across that landscape, the devastation passed over some small, hidden places, under rocks, beneath boulders, a bit of algae buried in a stream bed. And unseen beneath that massive devastation were small pockets of life, small pockets of safety where plants and insects and creatures were protected from the destruction. Scientists call these little shelters refugium in the singular or a refugeia in the plural. All these small pockets of life, these different communities of biodiversity were going about in their small shelters, and eventually they began connecting to each other, and life and an ecosystem was reborn. As we now find ourselves in this eruption of crises of our own, I wonder what it means for us to be people of refugia, to claim ourselves as an island of sanity. What if committing to creating small pockets of shelter where life can flourish is our own audacious, foolish demonstration of hope? And what if we believed that our particular congregational tradition, I listened to your sermon last week, Eric, that you beautifully outlined of what it is to be Congregationalist. What if our particularly unique version of Christianity, of being Christian community, where we learn how to hold our disagreement and difference and diversity together in covenant, where we require not uniformity of belief, but accountability in relationship with one another, where we are encouraged to be curious rather than certain? What if we believed that this little pocket of ours, this little unique expression of what it is to be Christian, what if that was worthy of our greatest investment? Not just for our sake, but for the sake of the most vulnerable, for the sake of those who have never been included, for the sake of our planet. In my experience in this role over the last 8 years that I have been in conference ministry, we in the Protestant tradition are quick to invest in social services, in affordable housing, in advocacy for the poor. We are not quick to invest in ourselves. We are not quick to say we believe that investing in the church is a worthy investment. As if we don't believe that what we are doing here, being community, working across difference, including those who are different than us, challenging one another to see God in those who are different than us, that in and of itself not worthy, right? We're only worthy if we're giving to the poor. We're only worthy if we're out in the fields. And it is essential. It is. It's one of the things I love about our church. But if we don't believe that we are worthy of investment, who is going to invest in us? Where is the generative, progressive church going to be if we don't go, we're worthy of making sure we keep around for the next generation? I believe the kind of people that we seek to be, people who love across difference, who challenge our notions of what is right, who are willing to sit down at the table with someone who is different than us. Man, I feel like the world needs more of that. And I see like our evangelical brothers and sisters, right? They have a very clear mission. They know that what they're doing. They believe that their version is what like Jesus saves. They hold on to that and they organize around it and they invest in it. And what if we could learn to claim that too, that Jesus saves? Not because Jesus is saving us from hell or giving us an entrance to heaven. But what if Jesus is saving among us because of how we show up in this world by seeking to be people who look like him, who love like him, who are courageous like him? I think the role of the Congregational of the United Church of Christ to create disciples of Jesus grounded in that kind of tradition, learning to love one another across difference. I can't think of a more necessary thing to invest in. And ever since I've learned of refugeia and islands of sanity, I don't think I have felt as excited as I am today to be part of this unlikely community of beautiful, messy, ordinary people who seek to pattern their life off the one who bears fruit like humility and kindness and grace and generosity and bravery and curiosity and peace and above all, love. Like, what if after all our prestige, all of our being the center of society, all of our great programs and all of our great buildings, what if after being the center and the power and the prestige, what we've been attempting to do here all along, to actually learn how to love one another? Actually learning to see God in one another beyond our own image, to love our fellow human being. What if that is worthy of our most foolish and audacious investment? That is what I wake up every day as your conference minister seeking to do. To help our congregation see themselves as these beautiful shelters of these pockets of love, these shelters that are preserving and saving lives. Because I believe that what we are doing here matters. I believe what we are trying to create, these communities that are not just bound together by an easy common belief, but the hard, necessary practice of loving one another and our fellow human being. That is worthy of our greatest investment. Amen.